It's been a rocky start for the Middle East in 2020. The prospect of war peaked after a U.S. embassy came under fire. A terrorist chief and his top lieutenant were killed in a U.S. drone strike. Precision-guided missiles were launched at American targets from Iran, and a commercial airliner exploded in midair over Tehran. Where are these troubles leading? On today's program, we find answers in the sure word of Bible prophecy. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the program. There was a news site in America recently that said one would be forgiven for thinking the end times are upon us after events in the Middle East. What is happening in that region, really all over the world? You look at these raging fires in Australia. We'll have to do a separate program on that at some point. But why all of these disturbing events? People are concerned. I mentioned that statement from the news site, even our own website, thetrumpet.com. We're finding some of our older articles. They're being searched for. People are concerned. They're looking for answers. They're turning to Bible prophecy. They want to know, why is the world the way it is? You come into a new calendar year. Generally, there's a lot of optimism and celebration, a lot of hope that this year will maybe be better than last year. And then look at the headlines. Look at the tensions. Our latest Trumpet, by the way, this is our 30-year anniversary issue, February 2020. And you can see there from the cover, the age of protest. That too is going on all over the world. But in the Middle East, you have mass protests in Lebanon, you have mass protests in Iraq, you have mass protests in Iran. That was really going on the last few months leading up to some of these even more dramatic events that have unfolded just in the first few days of the new calendar year. It's hard to keep up with it all. The Washington Post, back in October, it described this movement, all of these protests. It described it as a global explosion of people power, and then went on to say this year is exceptional for the sheer breadth and diversity of the unrest. That's what 2019 was noted for. Just the sheer breadth and diversity of the unrest all over the place. People are so unhappy with their governments in so many nations. And that's really what this issue is devoted to. If you're not a Trumpet subscriber, make sure that you call our operator during the break and request a free subscription to this wonderful news magazine that really helps for you to understand world events. If you're concerned, you need to be a Trumpet reader. We're going to begin our study in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 12, as we just try to get the context here. Why are there so many troubles in the world today? Why are so many nations in dire straits? Why are so many people struggling just to stay happy and positive and unified? Well, Revelation 12, starting in verse 7, has something to say about that. It says, "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven." So this is telling us right here that there is a real spirit world. It talks here about this clash between demons and angels, a war in heaven. And notice what it results in. Just to continue on in verse 9, it says, "And the great dragon," that's Satan the devil, of course, "he was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and the angels were cast out with him," or the demons that used to be angels. They were cast out with Satan the devil into, it says, into the earth. They're now confined to this earth. And this is a prophecy for the last days. So these verses right here, they tell us so much about why the world is the way it is. Now, you're not going to get answers like this even from the traditional world of Christianity. They're going to tell you that, well, while there's some messiness over here, or some turmoil here, or some wars over here, we have the solution. It's in this political party, or maybe this political leader, or just try to get as many people saved before it's too late. That's the thinking. And yet, where do you hear a religious organization coming out and saying, look, this is why there's so much trouble and turmoil in the world today. It's because of this war, this spiritual warfare, and the fact that these demons, millions upon millions of demons, are now confined to this earth. What are they doing? What kind of an influence are they having on the events of today, on the thinking of human beings, even the actions? Well, they're responsible for a lot more than most people realize. Let's look now as we focus in on the Middle East over at Daniel 11. Daniel chapter 11. This is what we just read in Revelation 12. Explains why world troubles are intensifying. And it explains why there's so many prophecies, like in 2 Timothy 3, that say it's just going to get worse and worse and worse right up to the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. Look, these verses that I'm reading to you today, they're right from your Bible. And they're talking about the end time. Listen to this one we'll read here in Daniel 11. This is verse 40. It says, and at the time of the end, so that gives you the time frame, in the last days, and of course I don't have time to get into a lot of other prophecies which can prove to you that we're living in the last days. You can know this if you just subscribe to the Trumpet and read all of the articles that we have in there. But it says here in Daniel, at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So this is an end time prophecy, and it's talking about a clash between two kings, the king of the north, the king of the south, and this is what triggers worldwide war or conflict, worldwide conflagration. This triggers World War III, an end-time prophecy here. And notice, verse 41, it says, and he shall, speaking of the king of the north, he shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. So the glorious land is referring to the area in and around Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the center point. Jerusalem is, as we've said before, it's like the powder keg that really sets off, as I say, a worldwide explosion. That's why we often tell our readers, make sure you watch Jerusalem. Why are there so many tensions in and around that city? In fact, speaking of Watch Jerusalem, we have a news magazine that we just started a few months ago. It goes by that very title, Watch Jerusalem. And the articles in this particular publication really do focus in on the Middle East. But coming back to the glorious land here, even Jesus in the Gospels, he talked about when you see Jerusalem compassed about with armies, then you should know that the time of desolation is very near. It's close. When you see that city surrounded by this international armed force, then you're going to know that the time is near, that you're very near to that abomination of desolation, and then, of course, the return of Jesus Christ after that. But let's come back to, again, Daniel 11, and look at verse 42. It says, he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So, going back to verse 40, the king of the north comes at the king of the south, crushes the king of the south. So that's a power somewhere in the Middle East. And it says here that Egypt won't escape either. So Egypt is connected together with this king of the south. They're allies. And you can continue reading in this passage. It also points out Libya and Ethiopia. So this is talking about a confederation of nations right there in the Middle East. And it's headed up by the king of the south. Now, my father, coming back to some of the events more recently with Iran and Iraq, my father, he gave a program about 4 or 5 months ago, and he, in this program, made a bold statement about how that Iran is not going to go to war against the United States. He said Iran's not going to go to war against Britain or even the little nation of Israel there in the Middle East. Here's what he said back in August of 2019.
Well, I can tell you from Bible prophecy that they're not going to have a war with America, they're not going to have a war with Britain, and they're not going to have a war with even the Jewish state, which is very close to them, or the country of called Israel today. But there is a nation that is going to, or a military power that's going to come against them with a military whirlwind according to Bible prophecy. And it's going to overwhelm them, and they're going to actually trigger World War III.
That's from August of 2019. And you can see that he based that statement on this prophecy in Daniel 11 and verse 40. Now, as I say, it's a pretty bold statement to make right at the time when you see all these protests. And then, of course, more recently, many pundits are saying, oh, there's going to be a hot war between the United States and Iran. The hot war is coming. Now, there has been some tit for tat for sure. And there may be the occasional attempt, like in the case of America, to reestablish deterrence, to try to prevent Iran from lashing out with a terrorist attack somewhere. But there is no hot war coming between these two nations. And the reason he said that is because of what's prophesied in your Bible. The hot war is between the king of the north and the king of the south. Now, back in 1993, this takes us back almost 30 years, my father identified the nation of Iran as the king of the south. The king of the south that is tied together here in Daniel 11 with Egypt and Libya, Ethiopia, and also Iraq. Now, notice what my father had to say in 1994. He said the most powerful, that would be Islamic country in the Middle East is Iran. Can you imagine the power they would have if they gained control of Iraq, the second largest oil producing country in the world? If, back in 94 it was. If so, there seems to be little doubt that Iran would lead the king of the south. So that was stated in 1994, more than 25 years ago. There was the Trumpet magazine, the Trumpet was around back then, talking about how that eventually you would see Iran gain control of Iraq. Now, a lot happened between 1994 and 2003. Of course, you had the 9/11 tragedy, and then the U.S. response after that, the invasion of Iraq, and then a very strong military presence for the United States in Iraq in the early 2000s. But notice again what we wrote at the Trumpet magazine. My father said this in 2003. It says, it may seem shocking given the U.S. presence in the region right now, but prophecy indicates that in pursuit of its goal, Iran will probably take over Iraq. And so this has been the very consistent position that we've had for more than 2 decades. The bold prediction, the bold forecast that continued even into just a few months ago on that program, even while all of these tensions have been escalating. And it's because Iran is the king of the south, and it has its allies in the Middle East, and it considers Iraq to be very crucial to building its or spreading its power and its influence. Now, if you establish that Iran's the king of the south, and you look on a map of the Middle East, or a map of the world actually, and you go north of there, or north and a little bit west, then you arrive at the heart of Europe. And of course, this takes us to one of the signature prophecies that Herbert Armstrong proclaimed for many, many years about the seventh and final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire. And so the King of the North, this is prophetic terminology for the German-led Confederation of European states. That's where the hot war is going to be, between that European power and that Middle Eastern power. Now, I don't have time to get into so many of the specifics with respect to the identity of these confederations, these unions of states, but we do have literature on both. The King of the South, we're going to offer that today on the program. You can learn all that you need to know about the King of the South and this prophecy in Daniel 11, another prophecy in Psalm 83, which we'll get into just after the break. But we have plenty of literature that also talks about the King of the North, Germany and the Holy Roman Empire, for example. But your Bible prophesies of a clash between these two movements. And really, even if you leave aside the Bible, look at history. Look at the Crusades. Look at the centuries and centuries of conflict between a Christian movement coming out of Europe and an Islamic movement coming out of the Middle East. And so often, speaking of Jerusalem, as we did at the start, so often these battles, these conflicts revolved around Jerusalem. And it went on, as I say, back and forth for centuries. Your Bible says there's going to be one final clash, one final crusade, so to speak. And then world war before the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. Now, I talked about those nations allied with Iran. When we come back after the break, we'll talk about other nations in the Middle East that actually come together in opposition to the confederation headed up by Iran. For now, make sure that you call our operators and request the King of the South. We also have, I don't want to give you too much to read, but History and Prophecy of the Middle East, if you don't have that booklet, and Jerusalem in Prophecy as well. Now, I know some of you may have one or two of these booklets, but if you have one and you don't have the others, then just tell the operator which booklets you would like. Don't forget also to subscribe to the Trumpet magazine. We'll be right back. One more point that we can make about this prophecy in Daniel 11 and verse 40. We've talked about the clash between the King of the North and the King of the South. And then in that verse, there's no mention of the end-time Israelites. There's no mention of the United States, the superpower, or what used to be the British Empire. There's no mention of those nations or those peoples. And so that's why, together with what my father has said about Iran taking over Iraq, that's why over the years my father has also said there's coming a point when the United States is going to vacate the region, because they're not even mentioned in this clash. They're not even mentioned in the Daniel 11 and verse 40 battle. Now, you look more recently at the news. We talked about the escalating tensions at the top of the program. And you have, again, the American embassy in Baghdad coming under siege. You have America's response in taking out Soleimani. Then you have the Iranian response to that. And now it looks like tensions have de-escalated. But isn't it amazing that as America wants to reestablish deterrence, as America flexes its muscle to some degree, that at the same time America looks like it wants to get out. And the president stated as much when he commented after all of that happened in the first part of 2020. He said, look, I'm going to be going to NATO. I want to make sure that Europe takes over this region or is more involved, he said. He explained that the United States is not dependent on the Middle East anymore because the U.S. is the #1 energy producer in the world. But Europe and of course other nations too, like China, they are dependent on Middle Eastern oil. And so here is the President of the United States saying, look, Europe, it's closer to you, it's in your backyard. So you take over, you get involved. Now, this is all very significant because of some of these prophecies that I'm telling you about. That the U.S. would vacate the region. Jesus talked about this international force coming in and surrounding Jerusalem. And where it says there in Luke 21 that they enter into that holy land, the meaning of the word enter is that it looks like a peaceful entry. They're invited in. That's what's happening here. The stage is being set for so many of these prophecies to be fulfilled. Let's go over to Psalm 83. We'll have to hurry. Psalm 83 and verse 5. This is talking about an alliance, and there's never been anything like this in history. But it's talking about a German-led alliance in the Middle East that is in strong opposition to the king of the south, Iran. And I don't have the time to set it up necessarily, but just look at all the names. I've actually left in brackets there the identities of these peoples. It says in verse 5, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against you. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites, of Moab and the Hagarenes, it says, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, it says, the Philistines. It says, with the inhabitants of Tyre, Asher, that's the Assyrians of old, Germany today, and then all these other nations are in the Middle East. Lebanon, Syria as well, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey as well, coming together in opposition to the king of the south. Now, as is brought out, I don't have time to get into some of the specifics, but here again, the King of the South booklet really does explain in detail the identities of these various nations, how that this is an alliance that is it's never happened in history, so it's for the end time, just like we read in Daniel 11, these two prophecies for the latter days. This was from the Trumpet magazine just last year. Brent Noctegal, he said, every important biblical prophecy that takes place in the Middle East occurs in a power vacuum created by America's exit. In fact, Bible prophecy indicates that the U.S. will have vacated so entirely from the Middle East that it will not impact it at all. That's what I want to draw your attention to on this program, and the literature will really help you study this a lot more deeply. But as America leaves, then we have to look at the nations or the powers that are going to rush to fill that vacuum. It's already happening. America wants out of Iraq, and they're basically going to hand it over to Iran. That's been happening really for the last many years. But now it's about to be made official. And we were saying it back in 1994 and 2003 when it looked like there was no way anything like that could happen. And we were telling you years and years and years ago that European forces, they're the ones that we need to keep our eyes on as far as coming into the Middle East. And that years ago, that looked like it would never happen. And now look, the U.S. wants out, and they want NATO, or they want Europe, to be more assertive. They want Europe to move in there and to keep the peace. Let's conclude over in Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14 and verse 1, it says, behold, the day of the Lord comes, and the spoil shall be divided. Verse 2, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. These two verses talk about the city of Jerusalem being split in two. Now, that's another prophecy. I don't have time to get into all of them, but you talk about the Middle East in prophecy, and there's a lot prophesied to happen. The city of Jerusalem divided in two. But I want to draw your attention to this spectacular conclusion. Verse 3 says, then shall the Eternal go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. Jesus Christ, the feet of Jesus Christ are going to set foot on the Mount of Olives in East Jerusalem. All of these events, you see, revolving around this city, soon to be the headquarters of God's family government, God's loving rule over all the earth. There's a lot of tragic events that happen before that government, though, is set up and established. For much more about these many prophecies in your Bible, and so many of them are unfolding even now, right before our eyes. For much more on that, make sure that you request these booklets today. They all revolve around the Middle East, Jerusalem in prophecy, the King of the South, and history and prophecy of the Middle East. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.